Now it's time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Hey, Lawrence.
Hey, Jen, so I'm putting that in my calendar. So Saturday, September 26th, I'm going to be in Arlington, Texas.
You will be. And now, remember, Lawrence, 2 years ago, you and Rachel danced on stage, I believe. So I don't know what you're preparing, if it's choreographed, if it's going to be improv, but people can prepare for that too.
Rachel and I prepare what we do on stage.
Perfect.
In that
Perfect.
It's the zero rehearsal team. Always has been, always will be. Not just because of my laziness, but because we think it actually works better that way.
Ooh, I love that. Well, whether it's a dance or a monologue or an interview or a convo, we're all going to be here for it.
Thanks, Jen. I'll see you in Texas on September 26th.
Sounds good. I'll see you there.
Thanks. Well, Donald Trump has now paid E. Jean Carroll in full. He had to pay her $5.6 million of Donald Trump's money. The unanimous jury awarded that money to E. Jean Carroll in a lawsuit that took years for her to pursue. And it does not prove that the American justice system still works, even though Donald Trump is president. It just shows that the system worked in this case. And it does show that Donald Trump has not yet completely destroyed the American system of justice, although he is trying to destroy the Department of Justice. That is what Donald Trump wants his next Attorney General to continue to do, destroy the Department of Justice. The Democrats had a theory of the case in the confirmation hearing of Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer, Todd Blanche, to become Donald Trump's Attorney General. Todd Blanche had already survived his first confirmation hearing last year to become the Assistant Attorney General to Pamela Bondi as Attorney General. He coveted that job of Attorney General every day of his service to Donald Trump. And when Donald Trump fired Attorney General Bondi and made Todd Blanche the acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche then launched an audition for Attorney General unlike anything we have ever seen in the history of American law enforcement, which included, among many offenses against justice, trying to indict a former director of the FBI for taking a photograph of seashells. Such was Todd Blanche's public, craven desperation to seize the title of Attorney General of the United States of America. Todd Blanche tried to indict James Comey for taking a photograph of seashells because Todd Blanche knows Donald Trump hates James Comey and wants him indicted. And that's the only thing Todd Blanche had to know. So the Democratic theory of the case in Todd Blanche's confirmation hearing today was that Todd Blanche was not the people's lawyer in his role as Assistant Attorney General or as Acting Attorney General, and he would not be the people's lawyer if he is confirmed as Attorney General because, and this was the Democrats' theory of the case, he is Donald Trump's lawyer. And 1 hour into his testimony, Todd Blanche, the now provably, objectively stupidest person to ever sit for a confirmation hearing for the position of Attorney General of the United States, said, "I'm his lawyer." Todd Blanche proved the Democrats' theory of the case against him with his own confession about who he really represents every day when he said, "I'm his lawyer." It came after a typically childish softball question from Louisiana's Republican Senator John Kennedy, who has cast himself in the role of the Senate's country boy. He asks folksy questions that could not be easier for a nominee who he publicly supports, like Todd Blanche. But Todd Blanche got too comfortable with the country boy's questions, just too relaxed, so that by the time the senator asked Todd Blanche if he is a friend of Donald Trump's, Todd Blanche's way too relaxed answer was, "I'm his lawyer."
Are you and President Trump friends?
I'm his lawyer, was his lawyer.
Nice try. was his lawyer. He got it right the first time. I'm his lawyer. Case closed, as they say. But minds were closed on the Republican side of the committee, as usual, where only one Republican senator asked any challenging questions at all. Todd Blanche was born 1 year after the criminal Republican President Richard Nixon said, quote, mistakes were made, in his ineffective and desperate defense of what was eventually exposed as the criminal conduct for which President Nixon was forced to resign the presidency. Mistakes were made was as far as Richard Nixon could bring himself to go in response to all of the crime that flourished around him that he encouraged and was part of the conspiracy. He could never say, Richard Nixon could not say, I made mistakes. He could only say mistakes were made. And so since that day, the year before Todd Blanche was born, one of the backstage flippant joke defenses that people throw around in Washington intending to get a laugh is, mistakes were made. But those are the exact words Todd Blanche chose in response to the 92-year-old chairman of the committee, Chuck Grassley, who, as usual, read every single question that he asked from a script prepared for him by his Senate staff, as he has done in every Senate hearing he has attended in his 45-year career. Chuck Grassley threw Todd Blanche a softball about his handling of the Epstein files, and Todd Blanche literally said, mistakes were made. That was his explanation for releasing private information about some of the Epstein survivors who suffered again at the hands of Todd Blanche and the mistakes that were made by Todd Blanche. Todd Blanche told the top Democrat on the committee, Dick Durbin, I'm not allowed to meet with them directly, talking about the Epstein survivors. And that was a lie, of course. Todd Blanche claiming that he's not allowed to meet with the Epstein survivors. And an hour or so later, in response to a Democratic line of questioning, he then completely flipped, forgot his previous answer, and admitted that, of course, he is allowed to meet with them. It's simply that he won't, no matter how many times they ask. Todd Blanche complained that Donald Trump was the first president to have any portion of his tax returns leaked publicly by a private contractor who was working with the IRS. And that is true. He's the first one to have his tax returns leaked because every other president of Todd Blanche's entire lifetime has publicly released every page of his tax returns. Every one of them have done that. Donald Trump is the only one who has hidden his tax returns from voters while in the presidency. On the Republican side of the committee, they encouraged Todd Blanche to spend much of his time talking about fraud and how successful he has been at the Justice Department pursuing fraud investigations, fraud on the federal government, including Medicaid fraud. But none of the fraud cases Todd Blanche referred to in his testimony come close to the greatest fraud ever perpetrated on the federal government. And that was the $10 billion fraud that Todd Blanche put his name to as the only person to sign a so-called settlement document in a case that began as Donald Trump's attempt to simply seize $10 billion from American taxpayers and put it in his own pocket and do it through phony litigation. Donald Trump mounted a frivolous lawsuit after the statute of limitations had passed, and he sued the Internal Revenue Service and the United States Treasury for $10 billion because that contractor at the IRS had leaked some portions of his tax returns. When that fraudulent attempt to seize $10 billion from the United States Treasury finally collapsed under political pressure, Todd Blanche and Donald Trump had to come up with something else. But the something else only happened, remember, because Todd Blanche, who refused to defend the federal government against Donald Trump's frivolous claim of $10 billion, could not pull off that $10 billion fraud gift to Donald Trump. And Todd Blanche sat there today as the only acting attorney general in history accused by a federal judge of trying to perpetrate a fraud on the court by participating in a fraudulent lawsuit in which Todd Blanche was, in effect, working for both sides of the lawsuit. That's what made it a fraudulent lawsuit. He was doing what Donald Trump wanted him to do, and he was not doing what any other attorney general in any previous administration would have done when facing a fraudulent lawsuit for $10 billion brought against the Treasury of the United States of America. The judge in that case has sent her findings to the New York State Bar, where Todd Blanche is licensed to practice law. She wants the New York State Bar to investigate Todd Blanche for what he did in that case. There are a lot of first-time in history stories in Donald Trump's regime, and Todd Blanche is at the center point of the $10 billion fraud story that he and Donald Trump tried to get away with and failed. But the attempt to help Donald Trump seize that $10 billion appears to have been enough to get Todd Blanche nominated as Donald Trump's next attorney general. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse said this.
Our research indicates that senior DOJ officials have never in the history of the department before faced a judicial inquiry into a fraud on the court participated in by the Department of Justice. That was the inquiry opened in Florida. The question about fraud on the court committed by the Department of Justice remains open in the judge's decision. Here's what she did find. She found that the Department of Justice colluded with the Trump plaintiffs, that the Department of Justice violated DOJ policies in that collusion, that department attorneys were derelict in their responsibilities as DOJ attorneys, that the department failed to zealously advocate on behalf of the United States of America, its true client. And as I said, the fraud on the court question remains open, an unprecedented allegation about the department.
Senator Cory Booker said something that summarizes Todd Blanche's life story as it will appear in future history books. When Senator Booker said, "You've chosen Trump over truth."
You've spent today making a lot of promises to follow the law, promises to be independent, promises to serve the American people and not the president. But we don't need your promises. We have your record. We have watched you exercise one of the greatest powers entrusted to any public servant. And what have you shown us? 1,200 victims waiting for justice. What have you shown us? There's 2 prosecutions. While the people involved, the victims, are waiting for action, one of the people prosecuted gets the most cushy arrangement possible after you visit with her. Again and again, you seem to be favoring the interest of a president and the powerful. You've chosen Trump over truth. You've chosen corporations over the Constitution. And you failed to meet the test. I'll say this in closing. This is why your nomination should fail.
Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. He's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator, you had your 10 minutes there. I think the thing we really should say to our general audience at the beginning of a discussion like this is this kind of hearing was impossible before Donald Trump became president. No president would ever send such a person up for such a confirmation. That's true of what we saw in the other confirmation hearing today in the Senate. We've gotten so used to this kind of person showing up in this situation where he's just been referred to the State Bar Association in New York and now presenting himself as someone who can actually represent the United States of America when a judge has found he specifically does not do that in his job. None of this would be possible prior to a Trump presidency.
Yeah. To a Trump presidency, when you look back at the history of the Senate Judiciary Committee and you look at Republicans like Orrin Hatch or Arlen Specter, the likelihood of them rolling over the way this crop of Republicans does in the face of obvious falsehoods by the witness, in the face of a judicial finding that this guy colluded, did a fake lawsuit in order to gin up the slush fund and immunity for his former personal client. I mean, the fact pattern here is beyond astounding. And as horrifying as the conduct of Blanche is in all of this, the fact that the Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee seem just okay with that kind of behavior, with that kind of destruction of the norms and decency of the Department of Justice, it's really hard to know which is worse.
It's like watching a Stalin-esque fear control people. They obviously just sit there living in fear of Donald Trump. And so anything that Donald Trump sends up to them as a nomination, they will all treat the same way, with the exception today of Senator Cornyn, who did ask very clear, very effective questions. Doesn't mean he's going to vote against this nominee, but he's the only one on the Republican side who actually did his job in this hearing.
Yeah, it's really astounding. And the target in front of them was pretty astonishing. Everybody hates the slush fund. The crooked Trump family amnesty deal is just as unpopular. The thing was arranged in a crooked proceeding in a federal court. The judge caught them at it and made some of the most appalling findings that have ever been made against senior members of the Department of Justice, culminating in ordering the clerk of her court to send her order to the New York State Bar, which has disciplinary authority over Todd Blanche. And in the face of all of that, a normal committee would say, hey, wait, you're already the acting attorney general. We need to get to the bottom of this first. See what the New York Bar is going to do. These are really deadly findings about you. We don't know the evidence yet. Why is it that Blanche and the Department of Justice never filed a pleading in that case? None. The complaint, no answer. The request for extension of time by the plaintiffs for the defendants to answer, no response. The amicus report saying there was a real problem here with case or controversy because of non-adversity and collusion, no answer. The dismissal of the case, no answer. The petition alleging fraud on the court, no response. They just completely ducked. And all of that signals to any rational person looking at it that Todd Blanche knew that that proceeding was crooked. He knew that it was collusive. He knew that it was wrong. He knew that it was bad faith, all findings by the court. And so he tried to keep clear of it by not filing any pleadings. Instead, by working through the other side's lawyers. You know, this is a collusion problem, and you're working through the other side's lawyers. So, I mean, this is a really deep mess at this point. And if Republicans are willing to vote to confirm him while these questions are pending, and then they get answered, they're going to have so much egg on their face, they're going to look like a McMuffin.
Every Republican senator, except Senator Cornyn, who used his time on this issue, talked to Todd Blanche about fraud, about the Justice Department's mission to stop fraud against the federal government. And not one of them mentioned the $10 billion fraud that Todd Blanche actively participated in, tried to help Donald Trump pull off. $10 billion is more money than anything they talked about today in any other fraud investigation in the federal government.
Yeah, and a fraud upon the court to produce the fraudulent $10 billion. It's like double stacked fraud. And by the way, you'd think there'd be a sense of irony about talking about fraud with a client who got convicted of 34 counts of fraud with this guy as his lawyer who ran like Trump University and Trump Steaks and put casinos into bankruptcy. The whole thing just is so stunning. And the idea that all these Republican senators, like the see no evil monkey, can just sit in a big line along the dais and lap it up is appalling. It's just unbelievable.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And coming up, Andrew Weissmann will join us with his reaction to Todd Blanche's confirmation hearing testimony. That's next. Republican Senator John Cornyn proved that the Trump slush fund of $1.776 billion to pay the violent attackers of the Capitol on January 6th who tried to kill police officers and tried to kill the Vice President of the United States is not dead.
I believe you have said that the weaponization fund is a moot issue. Is that your position?
Yes, it is a moot issue, meaning there is no weaponization fund. The weaponization fund is dead. It's not moving forward.
On page 4, this settlement agreement may be modified only upon the written agreement of the parties. Has there been a written agreement of the parties to modify the settlement fund?
No, the settlement fund's just not moving forward. There's no modification. It's just, it never started.
Is the settlement agreement enforceable as a contract by the parties?
Well, yes, it's an enforceable document. So I suppose if President Trump's counsel sought to enforce it, they potentially could.
Including the weaponization fund?
Well, they could try to enforce the contract. They can't force the Department of Justice to move forward with the weaponization fund. They could potentially say that, I suppose, that we breached by not moving forward. They haven't done that, and I'm not aware that they're planning on doing that.
Joining us now is Andrew Weissmann, former FBI General Counsel and an MS Now legal analyst. He is the author of the best-selling book, Liar's Kingdom: How to Stop Trump's Deceit and Save America. Andrew, that point raised by Senator Cornyn, is it enforceable? Todd Blanche clearly didn't see that coming and found himself admitting that it is.
Yeah, I mean, that was just an excellent point by the senator, and it is one where if you have an agreement, it can be enforced and you can get specific performance with respect to that contract. I should say in another way, Todd Blanche also did not rule out in any way, shape, or form the Department of Justice or another part of the government paying January 6ers through other funds. He was specifically asked that, and all he ended up saying is, well, those people may seek, like anyone else, to bring a lawsuit, but he didn't say what DOJ would do. In other words, DOJ could have the position, which is, we will always fight that. We will never allow, particularly people who committed crimes against police officers, to get a penny unless a judge forces us to. But he did not do that. In other words, what we can expect if he is confirmed is that they will use other sums of money. And I'm not saying that just to speculate, because we have seen them do that with respect to Michael Flynn and other people. So I think that is going to be plan B, because they were rejected by a court and by Republican senators to create the slush fund.
There was a stunning moment in this discussion. I think Senator Schiff was asking him some close questions about the settlement document that took the $10 billion fraud down to a $1.7 billion fraud that Donald Trump and Todd Blanche were both, according to the judge in the case, in effect conspiring together to try to create. And it's Todd Blanche's name, it's Todd Blanche's signature on that so-called settlement document. And it's the only place where the name of anyone in the Justice Department appears anywhere in the case. It's just on that settlement document. And Todd Blanche's explanation for that was, somebody had to sign the document. Those are his exact words. Somebody had to sign the document. No, no one had to sign it. It was a fraudulent document, which you have subsequently abandoned about a fraudulent case. But he is insisting there someone had to sign the document.
He also has a completely bogus claim that this is a typical thing to sign in a settlement. Let's leave aside that the court has already found that it is wrong to call it a settlement and has actually precluded people in court from calling it a settlement. But that is something that is just completely wrong for them to be trying to say this is normal. There was not a lawsuit about the taxes owed by Donald Trump where there was an agreement if he paid X that would finalize, for all times, his liability. This was about something totally different. It is wrong to say, oh, this is totally normal. It, in fact, has never happened. And as a point that came up again today, was that it's wrong for Todd Blanche to do this with respect to somebody who he is the lawyer for. In fact, at one point, he actually said, I am Donald Trump's lawyer, in a phrase that was quite the Freudian slip, and you can really pounce on because he has acted that way. Not just because he said it today as a slip, but because his conduct reveals that that in fact is how he sees himself.
What else stood out for you in the hearing?
Okay, two things, both related to Jeffrey Epstein. And there were places where Todd Blanche said something that was just not factually true. He said that the reason that the Department of Justice turned over Epstein documents belatedly is because they could not legally turn over Epstein documents until Congress passed the Epstein Transparency Act. That is false. There is a federal court that has called that out. And we know the department doesn't even believe it because they, in fact, were turning over, not a lot, but turning over documents before the Epstein Transparency Act. So that was what I would call to be a bit of a whopper, unless he misspoke. The second thing he said is that the only thing that they are withholding currently, the reportedly 2, possibly 3 million documents that have not been released, he has said that those are all irrelevant documents. In other words, they have nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. But previously, he and Pam Bondi have said, no, we have not turned over documents because we considered them privileged, or because we considered them duplicative, or because they're in a foreign language. In other words, a very, very different story than what he said today under oath, making it sound like everything that is relevant has been turned over. So big discrepancies in his testimony today and what we know prior to this.
Andrew Weissmann, thank you very much for joining our coverage tonight.
You're welcome.
And coming up, our next guest, Senator Mark Kelly, spent his morning in a confirmation hearing trying to get Donald Trump's nominee for Director of National Intelligence to say something intelligent. That's next. Today, Donald Trump's nominee to be his Director of National Intelligence, Jay Clayton, could not possibly have demonstrated less intelligence.
Who won the 2020 election?
I think I've answered the question. We can keep doing this.
Well, we're going to keep doing it because you're not being honest and forthright.
I'm not going to
committee.
engage in the theater.
It's a simple question, Mr. Clayton.
And I've answered
Who won the 2020 presidential election?
I've answered it.
You're here asking for the support of senators to lead America's intelligence community. We've established that you have an obligation to be honest and forthright with this committee and with the American public, but you refuse to answer a simple matter of fact about the 2020 election. Is that right?
No, that's not right.
Then answer the question. Who won the 2020 election?
I have answered the question.
Answer it. What is your answer?
I've given you my answer.
What is your answer? You refuse to answer a basic question about who won a presidential election, but you asked to lead America's intelligence community? Isn't it humiliating to be unable to answer this question, to have to indulge the president's delusions? We know, you know, Everybody in this room knows the truthful answer to that question. Why can you not give it?
I think I gave you the answer.
So can you tell me why Joe Biden was certified as the winner of the 2020 election?
I'm going back to my constitutional law here, but I don't want to continue to have a debate about this, but I believe he had the most electoral votes.
So he won the election.
He followed our process, had the most electoral votes, was declared the winner, and
who has the most electoral votes? Is it the person that wins or the person that loses?
I think that's your characterization. I'm not going to continue to do
The reason
this.
why we struggle with this, and I think it's especially important in the job you're nominated for, is because it seems that folks who are nominated for these positions just fundamentally refuse to disagree with something the president says. And the problem I have with this is he isn't in the room today. You're going to be in a room with him many times. And at times, you should have a difference of opinion. And if you can't disagree with him when he's not in the room, are you going to be able to disagree with him when you're sitting across from him in the Oval Office or the Situation Room?
Joining us now is former Navy pilot and astronaut Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona. He's a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee and a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator, did it feel like what it looked like? Did it feel like you were administering a sobriety test and he was failing?
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be this hard. I mean, you ask a basic question that's factual and they can't answer it because they're performing for one guy. They should be thinking about this as a job interview, in front of Democrats and Republicans. But somebody in the White House or Donald Trump himself told him what you have to say when they ask you these questions. And we've never seen anything like this before. I mean, I think we've seen people dance around, some tough questions, but these aren't difficult. So I was really disappointed today. I expected more out of him. These are some challenging times, Lawrence, and this is not an easy job he's going into, and he's going to have to disagree with the president, multiple times if he's going to be effective. So my worry is he's not going to be effective, and because of that, we are less safe.
I mean, it's actually one of the subjects that occasionally comes up in, Director of National Intelligence briefings and discussions with the president. Who won the election in that country yesterday? And he apparently can give an answer to that to every country except the United States of America.
He could also give the answer to who won the election in 2024. I'm sure he could give it for 2016. But because Donald Trump won't accept it, I guess he's afraid he's going to lose his nomination. I don't get it. I mean, they're not going to pull it on him. He has to be able to speak truth to power in this position. I don't get why all these nominees are so scared of this guy.
I want to take another look at something Senator Ossoff brought up, which again made it feel to me like I was watching a sobriety test that someone was failing. These questions could not have been simpler. Let's watch this.
Are you aware that Director Gabbard was present at the Fulton County raid earlier this year?
You brought it to me, my attention.
What is going on here? You've said at the beginning of this you have an obligation to be honest and forthright with the committee. I'm asking a very simple question. Are you aware that Director Gabbard was present at the Fulton County raid earlier this year? Yes or no? Are you aware?
I was.
You won't answer that question either.
I just said I was made aware of it by you yesterday.
The first time you learned that Director Gabbard was present at that raid was in my office yesterday?
It was the first time that in my recollection I've thought about it recently. Now, was I aware of it before?
What?
Pete Hegseth had to promise he would stop drinking in order to get confirmed. And Pete Hegseth's Senate confirmation hearing performance was at least more coherent. Doesn't mean that he was telling the truth or that it made sense, but he could form sentences. Pete Hegseth was sober enough, at least in his hearing, that he could form sentences. This guy couldn't even form sentences to you.
Yeah, and in this case, I mean, he was either not being honest with us or he lives under a rock. I mean, how can you be the person that the president nominates to be the director of national intelligence and you just don't know that Tulsi Gabbard went to Fulton County, Georgia, and collected some ballots on the orders of the president? I mean, how do you miss this? If you're an informed adult who is trying, you know, you're an experienced prosecutor, and you somehow miss this for months. You know, I think this is it's pretty obvious that this administration is having a very hard time finding qualified people for these positions.
Where does it leave you, assuming that the Republicans do their usual thing and just whatever Donald Trump wants because they live in terror of him and they confirm this guy? Where does it leave you down the road as a member of the Intelligence Committee expecting information from this person?
Well, we're probably going to have to try to call him back to the committee more often than we would otherwise, because I don't have a lot of confidence in him. It was incredibly disappointing. And yeah, where do we go from here? He's very likely to get confirmed, even though he does not have the extensive experience. I mean, that's what the statute says. Sue Collins wrote this law for the Director of National Intelligence to have extensive national security experience. He doesn't have that. I think we're going to have a lot of questions for him going forward. I sent some questions to him today after that hearing. And one of the things I want to know is if you can't answer the question and you don't know that that Tulsi Gabbard went to Fulton County, Georgia, where are you getting your information from? Like, what are your news sources? What are you reading when you're drinking your coffee in the morning? I think those are important questions that he needs to answer.
And what's in the coffee cup? According to what I was seeing there this morning, I don't know what he had to drink before that hearing. If it was coffee, it was a pretty strange brew. Senator Mark Kelly, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
And coming up, if Democrats win the Senate, we will not see any more of these clownish Trump nominees getting confirmed by the Senate for the rest of Donald Trump's term. That's just one of the things that's at stake in your vote for United States Senate this year. Ohio's Democratic candidate for Senate, Sherrod Brown, joins us next. One thing that was made clear in today's Senate confirmation hearings is that Democrats winning control of the United States Senate in the next election would mean that Democrats would be able to prevent Donald Trump from winning Senate confirmation for lying, incompetent, or maybe even drunk nominees. Ohio is one of the key states that Democrats have to win to regain control of the Senate and control of Senate confirmation hearings. And some polls have shown our next guest, Democrat Sherrod Brown, running ahead of the incumbent Republican Senator Jon Husted, while other polls have shown that in a statistical tie at best. 54% of Ohio voters disapprove of the job Donald Trump is doing as president. Axios reports the GOP, alarmed by recent polls and voting trends, is juicing its efforts in Ohio and Iowa to reinforce a Senate red wall they believe can block Democrats' path to a majority in the chamber. Republicans are especially worried about Ohio Senator Jon Husted's unexpectedly competitive race against former Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown, who's outraised Husted by more than 2-1. One Nation, the conservative nonprofit aligned with Senate Majority Leader John Thune, is reserving $28 million in TV advertising in Ohio. And joining us now is former Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. He's running for the United States Senate and is on the verge of being the target of a $28 million negative ad campaign against him in the state. Senator Brown, you did your time in those Senate confirmation hearings. You were in those hearings before Donald Trump was president, and sanity reigned in those hearings, no matter which way you were going to vote. Sometimes you couldn't tell which party the senators were in when they were asking their questions. And now they've turned into these clownish spectacles of incompetent nominees. What would change if the Democrats have 51 votes in the Senate next year?
Well, you wouldn't see clownish nominees like you say, Lawrence. You wouldn't see these terrible federal judges. I mean, it'd be a whole different thing. I don't know if Trump would send different nominees, or who knows, but you wouldn't see the spectacle you see today. This is all happening instead of the Senate and the House and the White House paying any attention to helping people deal with their problems, their daily lives. Gas prices up, diesel prices up, all that's meant for fertilizer, food costs. They're paying no attention to that because of these clownish, buffoonish nominees. And maybe that's the biggest tragedy at all, that where people just don't see anything that their government's doing. And John Husted's doing nothing to fix their problems in their daily lives.
So Donald Trump was sent one bill by the Congress this year, bipartisan vote, big bipartisan vote, for a housing bill to actually address the affordability of housing, especially home purchases, as well as renting. And Donald Trump refused to sign it. Donald Trump said it didn't matter. He actually said he didn't care about it. That's what he said. I don't care about the housing bill.
Well, I think that's exactly what he said. I'd worked on that bill some when I was in the Senate, but the fact is that even though some Republicans in the Senate and the House were unhappy that the president didn't sign it, and the president was so dismissive, they're not doing anything about it. They're not taking it out on any of these other nominees. They're still contributing to the John Thune Fund with the 29 million or 28 million coming to Ohio, with tens of millions to follow. That's why, as I've done on this show before, and I really appreciate this, that people can come to sherrodbrown.com and kick in 50 or 20 bucks. And it really matters when you're fighting tens of millions from these special interests that continue to batter members of Congress and batter this political system so that people don't get any kind of solutions to problems in their daily lives.
Sherrod Brown, thank you very much for joining our coverage tonight.
Thanks so much, Lawrence.
We'll be right back. Sherrod Brown gets tonight's last word.